Welcome to the Digital Manufacturer Podcast, your frontline source for all things digital transformation in manufacturing. I'm your host, Mark Flynn, and I'm here to guide you through the evolving landscape of manufacturing. In each episode, we'll uncover the stories of innovation that are defining the industry, offering insights and strategies that help to drive growth and efficiency. Join us as we speak to thought leaders and visionaries who share their journeys and the lessons they've learned along the way. So let's dive into today's episode and discover what the future holds for the digital manufacturer. I'm here today with digital transformation thought leader and best-selling author of the book Digital Made Simple, David Galea. David, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's really a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you for your time. David, to begin with, you describe yourself as someone who's passionate about making digital human. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means?
Thank you for this question, because this is something which is quite crucial for me. For the past 20 years, my main ambition was to make change happen, to support organizations and to support people to make a difference in their lives. And in today's world, what better way of helping people to change their lives than through technology? Technology is the ultimate enabler of change. Today, we are seeing it all the time. We are seeing different new tools and techniques coming on stream. And I feel that digital is one of the key elements that can help make a big difference in the world. And this is not just at an economic level, it is at a corporate level and at the personal level. Yet what I feel is that the world of digital is often misunderstood from people. Why? Because they think that it is about implementing a tool, having a magic wand that will make your problems disappear. And nothing is further than the truth. The real hard facts show that around 80% of digital transformation projects fail. And from my experience, they share one thing in common, which is they lack the consideration of the human factor. Digital is really a human thing. It's not a technical thing. We need to build tools around the human to make success out of organizations, out of corporations, and out of the economies as a whole.
That's brilliant. You touched on a phrase there I want to just re-emphasize is digital as a tool. And that's certainly how we describe digital to our consultants, to our customers, to our clients, prospects, because nobody can do digital to you. Nobody can do digital transformation to you. All we can do is provide you with the tools in order to make the changes and the efficiency gains that you want to make in your organization. You also touched there a little bit about your experience. So just give the listeners a little bit of an overview of your experience in the digital domain. And in fact, the experience that led you to writing your book, Digital Made Simple.
My experience spans across around 24 years, approximately starting from 2004, 5, something like that. And I started off with working with a big four firm initially, but then proceeded to work with the Office of the Prime Minister in Malta, basically focusing on change initiatives, including the introduction of accrual accounting and introducing automation for the financial systems at the public sector level. And then after a short stint in the public sector at high-level roles, I decided to take on a challenge and set up my own company, which is called Beat Limited. And I basically offered initially transformation services, but then I added on the digital element because obviously, as I said earlier, technology and digital are really the key enablers of change. So I decided to focus more on that area. I worked on several projects in the UK, in the Middle East. I was subject expert for a number of governments in the Middle East to review the public sector entities and their digital practices, providing best practice support to those entities. I worked with large corporations, including a major oil company, which is listed on the exchange, authorities across Europe, and also in the financial services industry. And I pride myself in going through the whole process. So it's not about providing just advice, but it's about getting your hands dirty. I do recall, for example, I was called in collective bargaining. I do collective bargaining as well. So I once was called in to do a collective bargaining for an organization. It was an aviation fueling entity. And the management wanted to automate the process, introduce technology. And I did not simply limit myself in providing the recommendations, but I brokered a deal between the trade union there and the senior management team to introduce these technologies and the digital solutions. And the success there lied in the mere fact I was seen as a pure independent person, and I was really touching and feeling the work that the employees were carrying out. So in the first instance, I introduced measures. So they were talking about we had a lot of work to do, but okay, what is a lot? Was a lot is subject. So we measured, we did work studies, and they were expressing feelings of frustration on the ground. So what did I do? I actually went with them refueling the aircraft to see what it feels like. And I became one of them. And I built trust with people there. And through this trust, it was also more possible to understand what they feel and actually make recommendations that made sense, both to senior management and to the trade union. In some cases, I went against the senior management, and it was quite hard because they had engaged me on this project and they said, listen, we have engaged you. Why are you going against us? Well, no, I'm not going against you. It's what is fair for both parties. It has to be a win-win situation for both of you. And I always preach about developing a win-win scenario. It's not about having a zero-sum game where someone loses and someone wins. It's about you both win by increasing the size of the cake that is shared amongst us. And this is the philosophy I go into. In practice, what I see always, in any type of change process, there is an imbalance of power in an organization. So you see some people taking on more power and other people taking less power. So those that stand to lose the power are likely to create resistance to change. So one of the things I do when I get into a digital transformation process is to understand the politics with a small b of the organization and see how different people could have different ramifications and implications within their change process.
So, David, just going on what you were saying there about your experience in digital transformation, you were focusing very heavily on the people aspect of digital transformation, and in particular, working with the users on the floor who are going to be impacted by the change to not only understand their perspective, but to get them on side and make them feel accountable for the change, which is a huge success factor in any of the digital transformations that I've done. What other key elements would you try to include or make sure we're part of any other successful digital transformation program?
Successful transformation programs are not linear processes. They are chaotic processes. So it's not a matter of designing and implementing. It's a matter of doing both at the same time. It is always what I see is very important. So I'm not a believer of very detailed digital transformation plans because in most cases, they don't happen. What you need is to plan to the right level of detail, in sufficient detail, with full consultation and being agile enough to make adaptations to change as you go along. In fact, in my book, I describe the digital transformation process across three main stages. So we've got the first stage is called the mindfulness, which means being cognizant of your organization. Where are your strengths and weaknesses and limitations in actually carrying out a digital transformation journey? And there are two contexts there that you need to keep in mind. One is the multiple perspectives, because what I find is that that senior management sometimes have a myopic view of where they feel they are today, because they have a just sight of a particular function or process. So they need to involve many different types of stakeholders across the organization who have multiple perspectives, and perhaps neither of the perspectives individually has a true grasp of reality. But when they are brought together, you can get into a process which I call reality calibration, which means having all the perspectives together that merge and fuse until something which is close to reality comes to mind. And the second element, which is also very important, is that we tend to look at data at a single point in time. But organizations are living organizations. They change continuously. So if you take just a photo or a snapshot of where the organization is at one point in time, that might not reflect reality. So what you need to do is to measure at different points in time and identify what trajectory the organization is taking on in order to make sure that it is going in the right direction for transformation. So through the mindfulness, you will understand where you are on the digital maturity curve. You need to understand what level of maturity the organization has achieved. Once that is achieved, then you can identify what is your plan. And the plan has to be aligned with your organizational strategy, because digital strategy forms a critical component of your overall strategy. They need to be aligned. It doesn't make sense to say that your organizational strategy is focused on customer experience and then you automate everything at a lower level. No, you need to have in place the customer lever experience as a critical component of your digital strategy. And this requires complete ownership from the senior management team. So you need to have the senior management team fully on board, because transformation has to be business-led, not technology-led. And they need to participate throughout the whole process. And, need to go across functions. So, end-to-end processes, as opposed to a functional view of the transformation. And although you need to have a plan, I think one of the most important things for success in digital transformation is the adaptability and the capability to change the plan according to the changing circumstances, because the circumstances change all the time. So you need to have your ears to the ground to actually listen to what the data is saying. And this means that you need to measure. This is the most important thing. And measurements, I specify them into three. You've got what I call the vital signs, which are those measures that need to be reviewed, if possible, in real time. And those measures that, if one of them fails, then the organization can practically die. I can equate this to a hospital, for example. If you have a patient in intensive therapy, you have the heart rate, you have the pressure, blood pressure, you have obviously the level of oxygen that is going in. So they measure these factors all the time in real time. And if something happens, an alarm bell goes on. And this is the same approach that an organization has to adopt. It's not that how they'll be having a multitude of indicators, but a few indicators, say 10 to 12 indicators, which you have to visit all the time and make sure that they are top of mind, so that if one of them goes wrong, then you take the corrective action. The second type of measures that I advocate companies to measure are those which are preventive checks. So what they do, these are carried out on a periodic basis. So you carry out a review of certain functions and processes on how they are performing. And if there is something wrong with those, then you go to the third level, which are the red flags. So basically, any red flag that is identified, you need to go deeper into the analysis and eventually identify how that can be circumvented. But measuring is just part of the story. Measuring means understanding. But in order to change, you need action. And action has two main dimensions. So we have communication. So you need to have proper communication across the organization to say, listen, there's something wrong in this function. What are we going to do in order to rectify it? And secondly, empowerment. People have to have the right tools and the right resources in order to make amends to that particular situation. I call this solve at source. As opposed to having to go across the whole chain of hierarchy, you need to empower people to have the right capability to take action at that point in time in order to get a timely change in the environment. From a leadership point of view, I subscribe to three keywords. Basically, aspire for a great vision that makes sense to the organization from a digital point of view. Inspire your people to that particular vision so that you are all on the same wavelength, and empower them to achieve it. So once you have these three together, then you can achieve the objectives of your digital transformation process.
I love it. And David, what advice would you offer manufacturers in particular who are trying to inspire and empower maybe older generation of operatives or operatives that aren't so digitally native to onboard these new tools and techniques and become part of that digital transformation? And then the second part of that question I'd have is, what advice would you give to the leaders and owners of manufacturers when it comes to making time available for those operatives to really get engaged in a digital transformation program?
Thank you for this question. It's very interesting. The first part, what I would think is manufacturing has perhaps some challenges in the sense that the manufacturing organizations focus a lot on division of labor. And it's not that other organizations don't do that, mind you, but manufacturers are practically founded on the concept of division of labor. And although it's very efficient, sometimes division of labor creates certain silos within an organization. And one of the issues and challenges of digitalization is that you need to break those silos. So by looking across processes, now you need to address the problem on two levels, one on the formal structure and on the social level. So on the formal structure, there are quite many different techniques like quality circles, for example, or quality improvement groups that you can apply. Lean philosophies where you are empowering people to create multitude of tasks. But what is important is I really truly feel that creating groups of people coming together, looking together, and then whole end-to-end process goes a long way to start addressing the issues around that particular process through the use of technology. Because unless you change your process, technology will make it even worse. So if your process is inefficient, all you're doing is automating inefficiency. So it is very important to bring your house in order before you actually automate something. Otherwise, you will be in big trouble. So that is my first piece of advice, having cross-functional teams with looking at end-to-end processes and having business process owners who are taking charge of that change initiative. But more importantly, I think this is something run of the mill, every consultant will tell you. But more importantly, I find is that you need to build commitment and trust across people. And this is the key ingredients of success, in my view, of any digital transformation process. You can have all the structures in place and all the complexities involved. If you don't have trust and commitment of people, that will fail. If you don't have any structure and you have commitment in some way or other, there is a good chance that it will succeed. Ideally, you have both. But if I had to choose, I would choose trust and commitment over structure, because people have a way of finding solutions even in the most messy situations. No? And how do you build that trust and commitment? Because in most management meetings, you hear about motivation. But in my view, motivation is very much overstated, because motivation is achieving something in return for something else. And motivation is temporary. You do it because you feel like doing it. But in business and in anything in life that you do, doing something because you feel like it is not enough. You need to be disciplined and carry out something consistent. And that's only achieved by commitment. And commitment can only be one to trust, because if your people are united for a common purpose and they know that it is for the common good and there is a just cause, then they will give you your commitment. And you have to be transparent, not even an open door policy. You need to break down that door, go down into the trenches and be with your people and suffer with the pains of the change, because following the pain, there is better pastures lie ahead. So that is something which I value. And I believe that senior management teams will go a long way if they spend time in being open and honest with their people, protecting them and their interests, because that will be in the interest of the company at the end of the day.
And I'm going to stop you there because I think that is the absolute golden nugget when it comes to digital transformation, particularly for manufacturers. So there's a couple of things there I just want to unpack. The first is the trust element, right, which ultimately leads on to empowerment. If people feel that they are trusted and empowered to make change, they will do, and they'll probably do a better job than at the cold face on the ground than the leadership team will, because they ultimately understand how the process works, all the different intricacies of it, what would make it better, what would make it worse. So trusting your team and empowering them to make change is a fundamental success point when it comes to any sort of transformation, be it digital or otherwise. The second piece that you mentioned there around the lean. So we see digital transformation and lean transformation programs go hand in hand with The lean looking at the people and process transformation, and the digital looking at the technology enablement of those changes. But the other thing I think lean brings about is it brings about a culture of continuous improvement, and it focuses team on identifying and solving problems. So if you have a culture that is empowered, looks to identify and solve problems, and then is cross functional, both in terms of different team members, but also different demographics. So matching the digital manufacturer who tends to be younger in terms of age with the operational experience of people that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years that really understand the process inside and out. That to me is the kind of golden triangle of what would make you successful in any digital transformation within a manufacturing environment.
It's brilliant. Yes. In fact, the triangle about people, process, and technology is well known. But what many perhaps fail to understand is not about having the best processes, the best people, and the best technology, but it's about having the right people, right technology, and the right processes, which means they need to be in balance across each other. So they have to be synchronized. You cannot see them individually, but they have to have the cohesion between them that makes sense. And balance is actually optimizing, because obviously this is a basic principle in manufacturing, that you are as strong as your weakest link. So by balancing the strengths across all the three factors that we are mentioning, people, process, and technology, then you are optimizing your digital transformation impact with the best resources you have.
Absolutely. And what about the leader? What sort of skills and qualities would you look for a digital transformation leader to lead those multifunctional teams? Like, what sort of things do they need to have in order to be truly successful?
Primary leadership, I would say that is the key element. Most would say technology, yes, you need to obviously to understand technologies and what are the benefits of those technologies to the company. But the digital transformation leader needs to understand people in the first instance. He needs to see how technology can benefit people, because if they benefit people, then eventually it will benefit the organization as a whole. And he needs to be an inspiration for people to create change, because a digital transformation leader is really there to serve the people, to create the change. He's not there to dictate, he's there to support others to make change happen.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about in our world, in information technology, there's a methodology for delivering change called Agile. And they talk about this concept of the Scrum Manager. And the Scrum Manager's role is they are there to remove impediments. And I think that's what any leader looking to drive forward any transformation in their business needs to be thinking of. You know, their role there is twofold. First, set the direction, set the overall strategy, provide your team with clarity on what it is you're trying to achieve and how they should go about getting there. And then the second is remove impediments as they go along.
I fully agree.
Yeah. And what's your thoughts, David, on digital transformation removing jobs? You know, we hear a lot now with the advent of AI and better robotics, certainly humanoid robotics are going to steal people's jobs. What's your view on that? Do you think it's going to be a net removal of jobs, or do you think jobs are going to change?
I think if jobs are lost, it's not the fault of AI, it's the fault of the human nature, because organizations have been evolving and increasing productivity over time. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have seen incremental and exponential increases in productivity. But what we've seen is an increase in jobs and increase in value added and increase in wealth. Okay, we've seen obviously some negative impacts because we've seen disparity as well in certain countries, and that is not right. So we need to see that. But it is up to us really to say whether more jobs are lost. Should we? And I think that organizations have a moral obligation and even in their own interest to say that, okay, with AI, we're going to get a bigger cake, but that cake should be shared with everyone. Because if we are sharing that cake with everyone, then everyone will strive to make that cake even bigger because everyone will win. When we say that AI is going to reduce the number of jobs, I would tend to say that for sure there will be significant changes in the job market. We will be seeing shifts. Certain jobs will be made redundant, but others will be created. So it is like in anything else in life. When computers came on board, when machines came on board, we used to see revolutions in the street with pickets, so on and so forth. But people are inventive. They can reinvent themselves. And my advice to people, because the future of work is going to change dramatically and significantly in the next years. So my advice to people starting off is that we need to change mindsets from one based on careers to one which is based on centers of power. What do I mean, centers of power? Well, because career is something which is static. I mean, I started to become a doctor, and 20 years down the line, I still am a doctor. But if I take the approach that I build a set of powers, so I have expertise in digital transformation, I have powers in the sense of connections with different people in different walks of life, I have a power of communication. By reasoning out in terms of a package of power pockets instead of a career, I can reconfigure those powers in a way that is adaptive to the market at that point in time, which is still very similar, but you can be more agile in the way you look at the job market. So really reconfiguring your powers in a way that matches the needs of that particular market.
Yeah. And I think if you take the analogy that we talked about at the start of the podcast, digital is a tool, and tools have been evolving since the year dot. First, we had shovels, then we had land movers, then we had automated cranes. All throughout history, tools have been evolving, and the people that succeed have been the people that learn how to use the newest and latest tools. So I think that's a key point for me. You know, success leaves clues. Looking back to being proficient in the tool that does the job in the least amount of time is the way to think about it, as opposed to being totally replaced. Are there any big technological trends that you're seeing being adopted by businesses that you're working with? I mean, AI is certainly one of them, but are there any others that the listeners should be aware of?
Obviously, AI has been quite in the news recently, especially generative AI with OpenAI and ChatGPT. So they have dominated the news, so to speak, in this area. I would tend that AI so far is one of the industry 4.0 technologies that has taken up in the last few years. But there are others that I think can follow. I mean, IoT goes hand in hand definitely with AI, and also DLT. We've seen potential, but so far most of the application has been more on DeFi and cryptocurrency as opposed to supply chains. I see a lot of potential in supply chains, and there are systems that cater for supply chains, particularly useful for the pharmaceutical industry and the food and beverage industry, which are well regulated as well, and also the aviation industry. That could be quite interesting. There could be applications as well, which are coming on stream in the media sector and also in the education sector related to augmented reality and virtual reality, which eventually could turn into a big metaverse eventually. And this could come on the horizon. 3D printing is quite obviously very relevant. It could disrupt the logistics industry. We are seeing some applications there as well that are coming on stream, especially in building certain parts at source rather than having to ship them from central factory. So that is also quite big. One of the interesting areas where I'm seeing quite urgency, which is, in fact, there is a European project about it, is quantum communication, where there is a movement because of cybersecurity threats. We need to build in Europe, at least there is an initiative, but not just in Europe, in other areas, to build a sound communication infrastructure to make sure that sensitive data, particularly governments in defense industry and banks, are not hacked by experts, obviously hackers. And there is a lot of investment coming on stream in that area. And because we're seeing potential dangers that obviously hackers can at the moment already hack computer sensitive data, which is encrypted. And currently, they don't have the technology to decrypt. But in quantum computing coming on stream in the next few years, they would have the possibility of hacking data, which they actually hacked today. And that would still pose a threat to these companies. So there is a lot of movement in that space. However, one of the major industries I see that could be really revolutionized is the education industry, because the education industry, there are several factors that come into play. You've got the AI, which is creating more customer enhanced experience. It can provide instruction itself to students. And also you've got the delivery, the method of delivery through augmented reality, virtual reality, and the metaverse.
Yeah. I was just thinking about education as you were talking there, because one of the positive effects, and there are many, but one of the main positive effects that we see from AI is the ability to train with much more ease and the ability to record and document standard operating procedures that can take the knowledge and experience from your experienced workforce and communicate it to your new starters relatively easy. Because one of the big challenges that we see in manufacturing is the ability to find skilled labor, and that is across the whole patch from back office right through to the factory floor. And we're seeing a lot of companies actually put AI and automation to good work when it comes to training with effectiveness and also efficiency. So reducing the time to value for new starters within the business. And you mentioned the AR and VR, which are two very, very good technologies at being able to speed up training. And I suppose that the other piece of that is the more digitally the world becomes, the greater the need there is for security to secure those digital tools against criminal actors, which is the quantum computing angle. And we had Simon Whitaker on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, who's a cybersecurity expert, talking about the real world threat that there is for SMEs around having their systems hacked, having them locked out, ransomware, having their data stolen. But we can only expect that risk to grow the more and more we digitize our operations. Just out of interest, would that risk stop you from digitizing your business, or would you just try and mitigate it as best as possible?
No, it shouldn't stop you to digitalize your business, because the benefits of digitalization far outweigh the risks of actually getting your data stolen. Obviously, the more sensitive your data is, clearly you have to put in safeguards for that data to make sure that doesn't happen anyway. So I don't think that there would be situations where it would pay you not to digitalize your operation because of data security risks. There could be some types of data where you might consider not obviously storing on the cloud, or although there are arguments that the cloud is pretty much relatively safer than almost having something which is local because of disaster recovery and other stuff and costs involved in that. I mean, technology is always evolving. There is nothing which is 100% secure. It's always about risk. So not digitalizing, there is also a risk that you can lose your own data. So if you don't have a proper digital system, you might lose the data forever. Whereas if you have a digitalized system and have proper security safeguards in place, the risk is low.
Yeah. The way I like to think about it is when it comes to our own data, if it's in the cloud, it's protected by somebody that is much better at protecting data than me. So it's almost risk transference. Okay, yes, they are a bigger target, but they're much more well able to secure it. David, you talked a little bit about metrics earlier being part two or step two of your methodology. What sort of metrics should people be tracking when it comes to digital transformation? And I'm thinking about, how do you justify the spend? Because the cost of doing a transformation program isn't as large as it used to be, but it's still significant. How do you go about setting yourself up for success when it comes to tracking return on investment, for example?
That's a very good question, Mark. In fact, one of the pitfalls I see in digital transformation programs is that they are often led by CIOs, and they focus on the bells and whistles as opposed to the actual value that the transformation can bring about to the business. So the way I see it is setting it up as a pure project or even a program where it's made up of a number of projects, where you need to identify what are the benefits out of this. And they have to be business benefits. So you translate in terms of enhanced customer experience, increased customer retention, increased revenues, increased profitability, reduce total cost of operation, enhance security in the form of less pilferage of data, for example. So what's important is you need to have quantifiable factors that can be verified and obviously treat it as an investment and getting a payback out of it. For me, if you don't get a payback within 2 to 3 years, then it's not worth it because technology always changes every time. So you need to be very careful on how you actually plan out a digital transformation program and make sure that you have a true return on investment and payback out of it.
We've heard a lot of customers talk recently about this fear about being left behind. So they're taking action because they believe that their competitors are taking action and they don't want to be left behind when it comes to being able to give customers the experience that they want and the lag times or the time to order that they expect to receive. And they also don't want to be left behind in the skills campaign. Most modern workers don't want to come in and do manual processes all day. They grew up in a digital environment. They grew up on smartphones. Their expectation is that the processes and work that they're doing today will be digitally enabled and not manually driven. So there's a need to kind of make sure that your tools that you're providing your workers are keeping pace with all your competitors. What haven't we talked about today in the realm of digital transformation that you would want the listeners to take away from this podcast?
So I think one of the areas is the implementation considerations. So which could be quite useful. Implementation, it's like in any other project. There are two key elements that need to be considered. One is the hard aspects, which are the technology and the processes. That's the easy part. And you can manage that through a proper project management methodology. So you can use either Prince2 or PMBOK or PMI, whatever methodology, or Agile, whatever. Okay. And you need to structure it as a program, and you need to have clear defined deliverables and clear defined actions and roles and responsibilities that you need to take in place when implementing that aspect. The second part is the change management, which I think is even more important. And this involves practically the stakeholder consultation, who do you consult, the stakeholder management, how you communicate with people across the whole board, how you take their feedback, and making sure that people know what they need to do once the implementation takes place. What I would like to add as well is that, I don't know if I said it before, but around 80% of digital transformation projects fail. In the case of AI digital projects, the percentage goes up as around 90 to even 95%. And that is very high. And the reason is that there are significant distinctions between a traditional digital project and an AI project. Whereas a digital project is finite, has a start and a finish. In the case of an AI transformation, where there is involvement of AI, it is a continuous process where once you implement the technology and the processes, you need to train the technology, and the technology becomes exponentially more beneficial to the organization. This is in contrast to a traditional CRM or ERP it becomes obsolete after a period of time. An AI application, its value increases over time because it is acquiring more data from its environment. It's learning more from its environment. It is able to provide better advice and assistance in your decisions.
Yeah. And what about making time available for the project team, David? I mean, one of the feelings that we see in some of our clients' programs is they expect their subject matter experts to do their day job and also contribute fully to the digital transformation program. So talk to me a little bit about like how much time should leaders be thinking about putting aside for their teams to engage in these? Is it half an FTA? Is it a quarter? Or what's your experience in that space?
I guess it depends. It's quite difficult to put in a time because it depends on the objectives of the digital transformation project. and the level of complexity of the project that is involved. In fact, what I like to start always when I carry out a digital transformation initiative is to assess the risk, because you need to carry out a risk assessment and look at the complexity and the tangible gains that the organization can achieve from that program. So the higher the gains and the higher the risk, the more efforts you need to put in to make sure that you achieve it, because you can pull in more investment, because time is also an investment. It's not just money. It's also the time of people on the job. So if there is no time for the management or the people don't have the time to do it, then it stands to reason that it's not really feasible to do, because you need time to actually implement that particular program. So my advice would be, when you create the business case for the project, is to include the time factor in the assessment before that is actually approved by the senior management, and make sure that that time is then allocated to that particular program.
Brilliant. Well, there you have it, folks. Digital transformation, it's not just about the technology, it's also about the people, making sure that they are empowered and enabled to drive the change forward, and that they have the time to make the changes to deliver the benefits that you're trying to achieve. David, thank you very much for being on the podcast today. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning into The Digital Manufacturer. We hope that today's conversation has provided some food for thought or sparked new ideas that will help you on your digital journey. To learn more about any of these topics discussed in the episode, head over to our website, www.rubictech.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform to help others join in the digital manufacturing movement. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a future episode. The Digital Manufacturer is brought to you by Rubik, where we're not just talking about the future, we're making it happen. On behalf of everyone at Rubik, thank you for listening.